I've analyzed over 100 sample tracks, and in this video I'm gonna tell you everything that I've learned from all this crazy amount of work. And it has been a crazy amount of work, so you're welcome. I just make content that I would love to have available to me when I first started producing. The work is not really rewarding. The growth is nice, but half of my videos can't be monetized due to using copywritten music. So I guess check out the Patreon for some cool stuff and, to support what I do here. Number one is a given, considering the type of channel I have. So it is to analyze music you are inspired by. Through these last 2.5 years, I've analyzed a lot of music to make my templates and my sample breakdowns. The year development is great, there's stuff that I notice now that would completely have gone over my head a couple years ago. And I do believe that the most foolproof way of improving your music making skills is to analyze the work that you are inspired by. Breaking down music will lead you to answers of questions you didn't even know you had. Because being self-taught, you may fall victim to the I've learned all the basics, so what do I learn next issue. And I know a lot of people have a concern about being original, but trust, you will eventually develop your own style. It will end up being a mix of your unique inspirations and taste. The sad part for me is that I've improved a lot, way more at analyzing music than making my own original music, but I am working to change that as soon as possible. Check my newly launched BeatStars page if you want to keep up with the development there and the original work that I do. But moving on to number 2, it is don't overthink it, workflow, and know your gear. I mentioned in one of my old New Jobs video how I was struggling to stretch the sample to have it the same way he had. I thought of many super complex and work heavy ways that I could do to get that same result, but I was incorrect. I figured it out how he did it by putting myself on his shoes. And when you do that, you stop overcomplicating things. When you produce, you should make the music making process the simplest it can be. The easier you make for yourself to execute an idea, the most likely it will for it to actually come out. So learn the most you can about your tools and know your gear the best you can before you go looking for more tools. Always having in mind that the goal is to streamline the music making process. Number 3 is sampling techniques. Sampling can be the easiest thing in music production, literally just copy and paste, or it can be the most complicated thing in music production. I don't want to go too much in depth about all the sample techniques that exist because I already have an incredible video posted, so you can check that out. Number 4 is something that I noticed the more I analyze music, which is repetition is a big part of music. I used to be a bit self-conscious about being too simplistic, but if you want to be fancy, we can, instead of saying that we are repeating the same melody over and over and over because we ran out of ideas, instead we can say that we are just establishing a motif. In music, a motif is a small collection of notes that captures the essence or idea of a piece. Motifs are similar to a riff, lick, or phrase. These terms all refer to a memorable passage of music within a piece. And I would also add that it is the first thing that listeners latch onto when they get attached to a track. In sampling, stutter patterns are very common, and it is also very common to use small chops and fill those gaps that you have on your sampling puzzle. Number 5 is microchopping. This thing is a hell to visual edit. And I think microchopping is either the most random technique in music production or the most meticulous technique in music production. The range of this technique is mind-blowing. I honestly believe that most of microchopping comes from auto-slicing, automatically generated slices on your sample, and then just playing around with building the puzzle from the chops that the auto-slicing gives you. But I do have to mention cases where I do feel like it was chopped with a purpose. Like when Dilla changes Johnny Don't Do It to Please Johnny Do It on Waves. And how he tells his fans not to cry because of his death on Don't Cry. Both of these stories are legends, so I can't attest if they are true or not, but I think they're great examples of showing how meticulous and purposeful microchopping can be. All the breakdowns that I've done that use microchopping are in this video. And I also have a few video ideas coming that involve microchopping a lot. Number 6 is mid-side EQ, stereo removal, or how I called it first, the Kaytranada sample technique. If you want to know the specifics of this magical technique that can completely remove elements from a sample without affecting the rest of the elements, the Kaytranada video is great for it. That video was posted on February 2022 and it was my face review. My setup used to look like that, and now, a little over 1 year later, it looks like this. I leveled up a lot in 1 year. My channel grew close to 700% in all metrics in the last year. And something a bit poetic, a little under 1 year after posting the Kaytranada video, I posted a short that updates the technique. The Kaytranada video is still fine, it serves its purpose, but now I do that technique another way, and the short is a way that I showed how I do it. And I also have to plug it because I edit the it. Next up is analog gear and downsampling. Earlier, I talked about how analyzing music will give you questions, and solving those questions will lead you to improvement. For me, downsampling was a great example of that. There were many breakdowns that I was stuck on because I simply didn't know this technique existed. If you want to learn more about downsampling, here's a video about it. But it is important to mention here that downsampling happened naturally on old school beats because they used analog gear. And that is very important to keep in mind. The people you are analyzing used a specific gear to get a specific result. Researching and understanding what they did is very valuable, especially because there are great emulators out there that can emulate the analog gear they used. But it is very hard to beat having the analog equipment. There's just something about putting your beat through actual cassette than, putting through a cassette emulator that is a plugin. That is why when they re-release old gear, it becomes such a big deal, like the case with the SP404. Number 8 is drums. I have 2 incredible drum videos that show all levels of drum sampling. You can check them out if you want some inspiration on what to do with drum samples, or if you just want to know what drum samples were used in over 1,000 tracks, so you can, use them for yourself as well. But what I do want to go over here is the swing. If you are sampling a track that has a real drummer or a producer that is heavy on swing, you will notice that the track is not perfectly on beat. It is either a bit late or a bit early compared to a metronome, and no tempo that you put on your DAW is gonna make every section of the track, of the sample, loop consistently. But that's a good thing. Instead of forcing the sample by warping it to fit a metronome, you should develop your groove to the swing of the sample. That way you have a track that has a lot more soul, a lot more feel, that is way less robotic. I'll make a full video on this eventually. Number 9 is sound selection and organization. As music producers, we tend to hoard a lot of sounds and have a bunch of stuff. Even if you don't plan to use it all, it's good just to have it. And a couple years ago, I tried to organize it all by having, all my snares in one folder, all my kicks in another folder, and so and so. But that was actually a terrible idea. If I'm making a dance beat, the last thing I want is when I'm scrolling through snares looking for a dance snare is to go through a bunch of sounds that have nothing to do with the genre that I'm trying to make. And that is because sound selection might be the most important thing in music. So what I recommend is when you find sounds that you love that fit a certain vibe or genre, you save them on a notepad, you have them written down, or you bookmark them. I know that Ableton has a great way to do this where you can color. For example, if I want all my rock sounds to be colored red, I can do that. It's a great way to organize, and I really wish FL comes up with something like that, and I think the new FL will have something like that, at least is what I hope. And finally, number 10 is break a few rules. Once you have your own healthy workflow, try challenging it by adding a new piece of gear, a new plugin, or just, experiment, do something you wouldn't normally do. I don't see many beats being warped to the decimal, for example. When I analyze, I see a lot of beats that are -1, -2 in semitones, or +1, +2, but very rarely, and this happens quite often with Madlib, honestly, I try to match the sample to the beat that he had, and in -1 and -2 semitones, and I can't make it sound right. But then when I warp the sample -1.73 semitones, then it sounds perfectly the same as it has on the beat. That is something that I would never do myself, but it's something very experimental that It's minute, but can give some cool results. Another example is on Madlib's beat Falling, where he puts 2 full loops on top of each other. Usually I wouldn't do this because the sounds would clash with each other, they would fight for space, but for some reason it just works here. Again, another thing that I wouldn't think of doing, that it just worked for him. And the last example is something that is very special to me, which is Alice by Pogo. Alice is a beat that I've listened to a lot, hundreds of times throughout the years, probably thousands at this point. But I only noticed something very key on it when I was analyzing and breaking down the beat to make a template for my Patreon. When I was analyzing the beat and I got to the drum section, I noticed that the track doesn't have a snare. I've listened to this beat for years without just realizing that it didn't have a snare. It doesn't matter, it doesn't add or detract from the track. The track is great the way it is, but I don't see many tracks that have kick and hat but don't have a snare. I just found that super amusing, just super unique, and something that I would never think of doing myself. But if you are in the mindset of experimenting, it might be something that you come up with. So yeah, see what being experimental can give you. And that's it. I've done way more than 100 simple breakdowns. If you count the track breakdowns that I do to make templates, it's probably close to the thousands. And 100 is just the number of videos that I've done from my studies. I can't guarantee that I will do 100 more, but I can guarantee that I'll keep working. Thanks, people.